Hi everyone, welcome to the second conversation in the Hustle Fuel series. I'm Aprajita Bhattacharya and my search for female role models from the world of technology and entrepreneurship continues. Our guest today is a true blue Hustle Fuel role model. She is a rock star computer science silver medalist from IIT Bombay, turned management consultant, turned venture capitalist, turned founder. She's currently building and scaling the world's leading data analytics startup that helps track every other startup in the world. Think of our company Traction as the Bloomberg for private market companies. Conceptualized through our own pain point of trying to source quality startups as a venture capitalist, Traction solves precisely that problem for private market investors through its database of over 1 million companies spread across 1,000 emerging tech sectors. Traction currently serves over 8,000 clients spread across India, the US, Europe, and the Middle East. I'm very excited to chat with Neha Singh, co-founder of Traction, and learn more from her rich personal journey about whether generalists make great entrepreneurs, about what enterprise tech can teach us about attaining global product market fit, and what founders wish they knew about working with venture capitalists more intelligently. So without further ado, let's get started. Hi, Neha.
Hi, Apu. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. So let's get started right away. So, throwback to your IIT Bombay graduation, you had an offer to join Google and you also had an offer to join BCG, Boston Consulting Group. You chose BCG. What were the key drivers behind that decision and how has that shaped your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, that's a very interesting question. I spent quite some time thinking about it at that time because I think both of them are very exciting sort of opportunities or platforms to sort of start with that, and both actually lead to two very different outcomes in life. So I had spent quite some time in thinking about what do how do you basically choose. I think one of the things which has helped me in this decision making is just to unfold it and then see how will the future look like in each of these paths. So at the peak, right, like if I were to start my career as a software developer, then at the peak, if I do well in my career, I'll probably be in the CTO stack, versus if I start as a generalist, as a management consultant, then the peak that I can hope to achieve is like a CEO of a company, or more at the business head, right? So both of them are obviously very aspirational one. And then I think I spent some time to think about, in the best case that both of these happen, what is the one that I'll enjoy most, and not considering any other factors, not considering, say, assuming that you make the same amount of money in both the paths, then what will you enjoy most? So for me, I think the decision was that I think a business head is something that I would enjoy more. I was very in like glued into technology. That's why, for instance, even like I took IIT Bombay, or I took computer science, that is something that was very core. The way I had imagined is, that excited me most is the business side of the to have an impact using the business side of technology, right? So that is one thing that I consistently thought, saw myself being sort of excited about. And that's why the starting as a generalist, or starting as seeing more industries, that looked like the most interesting aspect to begin with. To give you a small example, so for instance, in my college days, like when I started, this was early 2000, cell phone had become more ubiquitous. So earlier it used to be very expensive, like 16 rupees per calling, and then it became like 1 rupees per minute for calling. So it became sort of accessible for a lot of people. So I, when I were to think about, reflect back of all the things that had happened to me, like I think cell phone probably had the most impact on everyone, right? Versus solving technology. So to give you another example, like my dad is a nuclear scientist, right? So even that is like a very technically difficult thing to probably do that. But I think it's still the more business impact is sort of excited me more. So that's why when I sort of unfolded both of these paths, it just makes sense that if I have to come on the business side of technology, then I have to start with this as a career.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Like what you're describing is almost this sort of T-shaped expertise where you had that depth already from your academic background in ComSci, but then that sort of broad exposure across things just helps you pick up
Right.
skills and learnings from different domains and be resourceful and adaptable and just apply them across the board to rise in a more sort of business functional head kind of manner as opposed to being more specialist going down. So yeah, I mean, just given
Exactly.
my early training as well, that's something that resonates a lot. So you did BCG, then you worked as a venture capitalist at Sequoia. Now, as a venture capitalist, you're exposed to innovation across so many
Right.
sectors. You're literally seeing what's being picked at the cutting edge in different industries, who's solving which problems. How did you narrow in on the idea for traction or the problem you chose
Right.
to solve as the one which was most exciting?
Right. So for VC is obviously a great sort of like few years to spend because you get to see sort of industries, across industries, and you get to see them very closely. For me, it was more of a personal pain point. So as investors, you spend so much time in scouting for startups and scouting for private companies, right? If you talk to a public market investor, their set of relevant public market companies is very discovered, so they could spend more time in analyzing which is a good investment versus not. They are not spending time in discovering which is Infosys a company or not. Whereas as a private market investor, you spend disproportionate time in just scouting companies across sectors. So for instance, if you like fintech today, and if you want to just figure out all the companies fintech which is into fintech, not just in India but say in SEA or across different regions, that's a non-trivial problem, right? That was one. The second thing is that when you're looking at a company, you always want to figure out, okay, who else exists globally within that space. So there were a lot of SaaS companies, for instance, like I had started looking at, and they would cater to the global markets. So it's not just globally locally that you're talking about, okay, who else exists globally among that. And those are actually very non-trivial problems. So I think for me, Traction was more like a platform I really wished existed when I was an investor, because there was so much of time and effort that was spent in just discovering sort of data and getting data about all these things, that I really wish that that's some platform like this existed. So it was more born by your own pain point that can you do that. And I think the other large theme that we also were playing in is more and more what had happened is that companies information is getting available online, right? So there's a lot of digital footprint about companies. So you don't have to, if you want to figure out, okay, what does browser stack do today, you don't have to, even before meeting the team, you can actually know a lot about the company, what space is it doing, what problem is it solving, what are the customers saying, etc. Right? So that is a macro trend that we had seen, and you continue to expect that to accelerate, which is more and more digital footprint about companies. So you can actually use technology to be able to build this private market information.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And so sort of building on that, is the product more suited to, like you said, thematic sourcing, where you say you want to look for a good SaaS opportunity or a fintech opportunity, or is it more suited to opportunistic sourcing, where say Google goggles for dogs, or you just find a hot company which is not necessarily tied to a fund's approach or its sectoral focus, but it's still a great opportunity.
Right. So I would say it's both. It's a lot thematic as well, because when you are looking at companies, you even if you have to place a bet on a particular company in social commerce, you would want to at least look at the landscape and who else sort of exists within that. So that just knowing the landscape is one key element when you are sort of doing investing across stages. The second thing is, even when you are looking at one interesting opportunity, then starting from that company and then going and then finding out information, what does its cap table say, who are its competitors. So both of them are actually, I would bucket the first one is sort of in sourcing, the second one more in diligence. So I would say we actually do both of that. And then also a part of portfolio management, which is what is the third thing that you do after you would have made an investment.
Right, right. And just when I guess you're sourcing or building, helping in private market investors pick this sort of quality pipeline, there are of course some metrics like you described which are very easily quantifiable, right? They're just hard, raw numbers that an investor needs to evaluate the quality of a startup. What about the more intangible metrics? How do you sort of build that into the product? Like, say, quality of management or founding
Right.
team or things like that?
Right. Yeah. So I know actually that's a very interesting question. So what we so to give you an example, the way I would source companies, when you are investors, you would track obviously all the digital footprints. So someone who's hiring, you would track it, or someone, you saw an ad about a company, you would track it. Right? That's one. The other ways you would also scout a lot of companies by networks. So for instance, I was IT Bombay, so I'll ask my friends in the peer groups that is there any interesting startup in your batch which is coming up. Similarly, you can actually go college by college, and then even if you know a few people, you can try to scout some interesting companies which is coming out of their batches. In fact, like we actually have a sourcing by network as well, so you can actually track companies coming across different networks. For instance, like if you want to track SaaS companies, so Chennai is a very big hub. So X people from Zoho or Freshworks, they are likely to, if they are starting a company, then you would want to know about them. So you also have sort of those networks that you can actually scout companies from.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the personal networks is a huge part of like just getting that initial vote of confidence, and somehow building
Yeah.
that into your product and process seems like it's very important. So like you said earlier, you're serving a global market. Like when you're helping companies identify other private market companies to invest in, it's not a local play, it's thematic and it's global. And in fact, you were incubated in the Bay Area, but then you moved full-time operations to Bangalore. So what made you think that serving a global market out of Bangalore made more sense?
Right. So actually, after having seen a lot of global SaaS companies as an investor, the first thing was, whether this is going to be an India only play or this is going to be global play. So it was very clear that this whole need for a private market data play is a global play, essentially. And that's why we started in US, because that is the largest market in a sense of private market investors and of also corporates. Um, that's that. In fact, US was the first geography that we launched, and then we launched the other countries. So when you think about, any, like, even if you look at the public market platforms, they're typically global platforms. So I think when we thought about the platform, it was clear that the tech stack or the infrastructure that you need to build for solving this has to be global. It is not just local. So all our backend also, we built it like that. So it was, global from sort of day one.
Right. But in terms of talent, you
And
thought the talent pool in Bangalore would serve you as well or maybe better than the talent pool you would have in the Bay Area?
yeah, so that was an interesting question. So we actually started first in Bay Area because we thought this can be solved purely using technology. And when we started working with the initial set of customers, we realized that they actually need enterprise grade data. So they are willing to pay 10x more. In fact, we launched two products. One is for $100 and the other one is for $5,000 a month. And there were more takers for $5,000 a month product because people wanted enterprise grade data, because you're working with high paid professionals, you're working with partners, who are willing to, for them the price doesn't matter, but they want sort of actionable data. So then we realized that in addition to tech, you also need a team of analysts, and obviously Bangalore and India being like a good hub for all this talent pool. If you look at India has been a back office for a lot of these data companies. So if you look at the large data companies like an S&P or a FactSet or even McKinsey's Knowledge Center, India has been sort of the hub for serving those needs globally. So it has a good talent pool. So then it was an obvious this thing that if you have to build a team which requires both, then India and Bangalore is a good hub for that.
Absolutely. And so what do you look for in a product hire? I mean, as you obviously scale, that becomes more and more crucial to developing the right product. So what are some things you look for when you make product hires?
So yeah, hiring is one thing that you have to that you will hear from all the founders. That is the number one sort of a pain point, or also the strong point which is there. So for us also, as hiring has evolved, I would say when we were starting, it is a lot based on reference, based on some second degree, third degree person that have got recommended. So the initial team, I would say, got hired through that. As we obviously scaled the team, and now we are also in the 8th year of the company's life cycle. Now it is a lot become based on inbound. So you're looking at more sort of specialized skills, and you're more looking for people who want to do that and build a career in that. So I would say initially it was more reference based, and over time it has become more inbound based. Coming to the third question, actually, that you were saying, which is what is the quality that you look for in a product, person. So for us, actually, tech, product, analyst, both are, these are sort of important stacks, which is there. In product, so for us, the product is actually a new platform. It is not a replacement of any other platform. So for instance, it's not like a CRM wherein a CRM existed and we are making a better CRM. For us, it is a new platform. So, this budget, what people are paying as didn't exist earlier, and they have to pay, they have to sort of create this need. We have created this market essentially, right? So there are positive and negative. So there's nothing else to see from, and then you have to do it. So for us, someone who can build product, has to be good at problem solving, because, there's nothing else that they can refer. They have to figure out, that this is a particular module that would be helpful. That is one. I would say second, obviously, is customer empathy. You have to understand the customer workflows. You have to empathize. You have to empathize with the customers when you talk to them. Probably that is the second thing which I would look for in the product hire. And obviously there are other small things, which is just the attention to detail, as you're working.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. I mean, scrappiness is something I feel like product hire or otherwise everyone in a agile sort of setup needs to have. So you mentioned another interesting thing. You said there were two price points when you started, 100 and 5,000. And there were interestingly more takers at the higher price point, because this is sort of enterprise grade data. How did that price elasticity vary in, say, the US versus a market like India? Did you see differences in the initial sales process across those geographies?
So that's an interesting question. We people think that Indian companies, you might have a different price point for India, and you might have a different price point for different regions. But we actually have the same price point globally for all the regions. And I would say it's a function. We haven't found any sort of friction in the segments that we work with. Obviously, if you're working with, say, an SME segment or someone else, you might have some differences across regions. But for our segment that we work with, which is private market investors and large corporates, we have not seen any difference in any sort of hesitation or different expectations that people have. So for us, actually, the pricing is same globally, irrespective of the geography.
And was it easier to sell at that price point in certain geographies versus the other, or you saw similar uptake right from day one?
Actually, there was no correlation. It was basically because this was, when we started, it was a little bit of a data starved industry. There weren't a lot of things that existed earlier. So it is just a function of, I would say, maturity in the different markets. So to give you an example, US is a much more evolved VC sort of tech investing market than what India was 10 years back. Right. Obviously, now even India or SEA has become fairly sophisticated. But I think when we were starting probably 8 years back, US was a little bit more sophisticated. So it differed slightly in the modules which are more popular over here versus there. So to give you an example, in India, a few years back, founders were not so savvy around VC. So they would not approach you. You actually have to approach them and then make them understand what a VC is, which is what I had done when I was starting investing. Not everyone knew about VC as an asset class. Right today in India, everyone knows about VC, and then they are actually just figuring out what's the best network to do that. So that changes a little bit of what modules are used. But in terms of the ease of adoption, I think both of them are sort of fairly underpenetrated as a market, and both have the different flavors. So I would say that it's not so much different across the regions.
Got it. So then one part is acquiring the customer, then it's driving stickiness. What sort of things have worked for you to get that sort of stickiness? What do you see customers asking for?
Right. So one of the things that we sort of track very actively is, what is your daily actives, monthly actives, how frequently are people using. You want to get in the daily workflow of the customers. So you start with one pain point, which is fairly acute that the person has. So for instance, constantly when you're looking at what are the top couple of things that you want to do, so you start with the most pain point, and then over time you keep adding software to help you integrate more in the workflow of your customers. So that is the same journey that we have taken. So you start with one pain point which is there, and over time you keep building workflow modules which make it much more easier for people to use it on a daily basis. So I would say that has probably worked well for us in terms of sort of increasing penetration. The second aspect is having a good support team. For instance, we have a support team which, if anyone has any query, they can actually just shoot that across over a mail or on a real time chat basis as well. That actually gives people answer instantly, which they sometimes lack, and you're able to get a lot of customer feedback from those interactions. That is there. And I think the third thing which we have just started and we are going to do more of it is personalization. So if someone wants to track health tech, or someone wants to track social impact startups, then how do you make it very easy for them to do that, or track those sectors, or track those companies locally as well as see the trends globally? So that has actually also helped us in increase the penetration within the users, and we are going to continue to add more sort of modules within that theme of personalization.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And do you think these sort of integrations, customizations, they also help you compete and differentiate against some of your global competitors, like say a Crunchbase or a CDN Cells?
The interesting part about, so we are in a vertical SaaS business. The interesting part about it is not so much so competitive as much as, say, you would say like a Swiggy versus Zomato, where it is, you are competing neck to neck for market share. Currently, globally, there are only about 3 or 4 players which are there in the private market data space, and there is sufficient differentiation among different players which currently exists. So currently, I think we have found more. We have put more focused on selling, concept selling about why you should use it versus why you should use versus the competitors. Because I think currently the approach that we all started with is slightly different
Got it. So it's
within the same
saturated,
problem.
but it's not as competitive neck to neck. Got it. That makes
Yes,
sense.
yeah.
So now, like you said, it's been several years. Obviously, people, process, product, like those building blocks are in place. Now that you've raised a lot of funding, like how do you think in terms of the path forward, in terms of healthy unit economics versus growth? Like how do you sort of map that in your view of the future of Traction?
Right. For us, actually, thankfully, because of the fact that I guess we are focused around, we are a subscription SaaS-based companies and also focused around enterprise customers. We have been able to be very cash efficient, I would say. We have had so we are actually we had turned cash flow positive recently. We are also nearly sort of bottom line positive. I think that is one healthy sign of the business that is there, which is just a function of, because you are into sort of subscription business as such. If we were in a consumer business, I think the playbook would have been different. So that is one on the business side. On the second side, I think we think that the private market is very deep. It is just, if you see the activity today, it has been increasing, right? Like if you look at even the activity in India, the number of companies, quality companies coming up, number of unicorns getting created, everything has sort of accelerated, and that is only going one way. So we believe that the market is very deep, and then you keep building more data, building more sort of modules to serve these customer segments. And so we are sort of fairly excited about the fact that this market is expanding at the space.
Yeah. And looking inside out, like you said, at all this data that you see on private market companies from the Traction database, what are some big trends you see in the way the Indian startup ecosystem is evolving?
So I'm fairly excited about the Indian startup ecosystem, and it has come a long way in the last 10 years, I would say. So to give you an example, so the pace of activity has increased. So earlier you could sit on a term sheet for like 3 months, 4 months, and it used to be more of a VC's market. There were a few VCs and there were a lot of companies, and then VCs can actually sit on particular deals for a lot of time. Right now, it has completely changed. It's more of a founders market that so founders get a term sheet, and the VC actually works over the weekend to give sort of competing term sheets or look at the company. So I think the power equation has sort of shifted, which is in a good way. That there are a lot of quality companies which are coming up. That is one. The second is, if you look at companies are scaling. To give you a classic example, EdTech used to be a very sort of a cold market 10 years back, and right now look at the way Byju's has executed in EdTech, and they are doing acquisitions not just locally but also globally, and such large acquisition. So the scale at which they have built, it is amazing to see that large company getting created in this space from India. So the second is the scale of companies have sort of increased a lot. Right now, there are about, I think, some 12 unicorns this year in India, and I expect that pace to probably become 10x in the years to come.
Yeah, I mean, that is just, it's exciting. It's exciting to see that growth, and it's exciting, like you said, to see local going global, which is not wasn't a very prevalent dynamic earlier.
And the other thing that we actually joke about is, that earlier people used to celebrate 100 million of valuation. Now people celebrate like a unicorn valuation. In 5 years, people will actually not even celebrate unicorn valuation, because there'll be companies who will be breaching, decacons or multiple of those. So, I think just the scale of companies and the expectation is increasing so much.
Yeah.
So interestingly, I was actually in Stanford when Aline Lee had first written that article about unicorns in TechCrunch, and at that time, I think there was some stats of there were just a handful of unicorn that used to get created in US. In a year, and right now there are much more than that getting created in India every year. I think probably in a quarter, which is getting created. So that whole activity, from the time that this term was coined, I think just the magnitude of the companies within that has exploded.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the acceleration and just the scale is fantastic. So you have an interesting perspective. I mean, you've been on both sides of the table, both as a VC and now as a founder. So I want to switch focus and learn from that perspective of having been on both sides of the table. So when you were an investor, what did you look for in a founder?
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting question. And then, you would get different answers from different people, because it's really, there are different companies that have become that have become sort of scaled. The things that typically I look for, if you speak to people, there are 3 or 4 elements that they will talk about most. One is, the team, the market, the execution, right? And probably the competition, the competitive landscape, and the level of competition which exists. So for me, when I am actually looking at companies to invest in, I typically look at market as the first thing. Is it a large market? Is it a growing market? Is it a trend that is going to accelerate? That is probably the first thing. And the second thing would be the team. And the team, there are more subtle aspects. In the team, you would look for, how what is the connect of the founder to the problem. I think that is one key thing. How desperate the team is to solve that problem. In addition to some of the other qualities like persistence, etc., which people also talk about. I think these are the 2 things that I actually look for. Market actually first, and then the team, because as people say, great team, great market, obviously great. Great team in a B market versus, you'd rather back a B team in an A market. So I think that markets probably are most important in a private market company, just because you are betting for the next 10 years, right? You're not just there for a few years. So that's probably first, and then would be the team. So that's how I typically look at when I'm looking at companies.
Yeah, and sort of that hungry, smart, foolish sort of model for a founder is something we hear a lot about. An interesting thing that you don't mention, but very often you see a correlation in founders that are backed by VCs is just very high pedigree, right? Like folks who have a lot of, say, academic pedigree or professional pedigree before they became founders. Do you think that's just a correlation, or, I mean, that's actually something people index on?
That is a bit debatable, because there are, examples either side. There are people, even if you see India, sort of the large companies in India, founders have different backgrounds. So all of them need not be from, your known colleges or your known companies. I think that is changing. I think that is changing as the ecosystem is evolving. So in the initial time, the people with probably, some of the top colleges had better network, better access to capital, etc. But I think as the ecosystem is more evolving, you're also seeing people who have been in a particular industry, and who, because of the fact that they've seen this industry with so closely. Like, for instance, someone who has seen SaaS more closely is able to do a SaaS startup much more successfully than anyone else, or someone who has seen healthcare more closely is able to, do that. So I think that is changing right now as the industry is maturing. So I
Yeah,
would say that is right now, it may be the criteria earlier on, but right now it has not remained a criteria.
exactly. And like you said, right, if you're trying to solve difficult problems in markets that have a lot of potential, someone who understands those markets is obviously very, very helpful. Now, sort of
Exactly.
flipping to the other side of the table, as a founder, how do you do your due diligence on an investor?
Right, that is another interesting question. So I would say, as a founder, I had the privilege of also seeing a lot of companies, and seeing, how investors work with companies, and, the goods and the bad part of it. Uh, the way So for a founder, I would say choosing a large investor or a board member is actually very, very important, because, that defines a lot of quality of running the company in the next, years to come. That's one thing. And for me, I think a couple of the things that I would look for, and that we have been sort of fairly conscious, and we are, glad to have the investors that we have. So one is basically, you look for a board member for giving inputs on the strategy. So for instance, you are very focused on your industry, but someone who's, like a board member who's seeing a lot of industries, you get a lot of inputs on the strategy level decisions. So that is one thing that you should do that. The second thing is that someone who has, the other thing that is, one thing that I really look for when I'm an investor is, in getting a new investor on board, is that how much connect do they have to the market. So that is debatable. Sometimes people say that I'm actually just backing a company for the team, right? But for me, what I've realized is that, every company goes through a lot of cycles. So if there is a connect that the investor has with the market, or, if they have a view on how the market will be, or if they're excited about it, that's very helpful, while running the company, so that, you can actually get some ideas as you're building, and as you are sort of going more deeper into the market, right? And I would say, I think third is obviously, like, you typically, founders should do a ref check. Just speak to other like companies who have worked with those investors. I think that is very helpful. But I think that is done lesser, I would say, from the founders. I think now founders are becoming more mature about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, like one is getting the capital quickly and efficiently, but it seems like partner fit strategically is something you also index very heavily on.
That is
What
very
should,
important, I would say. Yeah.
yeah, like what should first time founders think about in terms of how to raise smartly as it affects their dilution? I mean, very often you see first time founders being left with a very small slice of the upside after multiple rounds of raising. How do you think about that?
Right. No, that's a good question. So I think, yeah, I've seen different levels of people who come from the startup ecosystem. They are more aware of these than people who are doing their first startup, or, who are working with the first startup. I would say a couple of things to keep in mind. One is, you should be conscious about the dilution that you're doing across different rounds. To give you an example, typical seed round dilution is, between 10 to 15%. So if you are doing a seed round between, like, 25% dilution, it is actually not the norm. And what will happen is that, when you are getting a Series A investor, wherein you are getting a Series B investor, that time your cap table looks fairly diluted to the new incoming investor, and they are actually a little cautious about, whether the team has enough sort of stake or not. So that is one thing that I typically, whenever I'm speaking to founders, that's one thing that different rounds have different dilution percentages, which are sort of fairly market standard, and you should know that any deviate. And if you're getting a term sheet which is in deviation of that, then you should probably rethink or whether you really need that or not. Yeah, so I think that's it. And obviously the second thing is about how do you keep smartly raising and doing that. So there I have seen two approaches. One is there are founders who say that I want to start a process at a particular time, or when a particular hit a milestone, I want to start then. Which I feel is a little tricky, because what if a situation like COVID happens, that you would have planned that you hit a particular milestone and then you start the process. I would say the more pragmatic way of doing it is keep talking to investors. And for instance, in our case, actually, a lot of the rounds which happened were inbound. In our case, funnily, because investors were also customers, so you could actually manage to interact with many more of them. But that has really worked well, which is basically someone says that this looks interesting, can I would love to invest, and then you figure out what is the structure that basically works for them based on what is the ticket size, etc., that they are comfortable with. You basically figure out a structure that works for them. So I would say, I think right now I've seen that founders are becoming very much more savvier, which is basically keep talking to investors, and whenever you are thinking about a proper round, at that time, they're not meeting you for the first time for an investment. They've actually known you, and then now you're having a conversation about an investment. So that's much more easier.
Totally. And how do you think about voting rights and such? How do you structure those in as you sort of keep raising more funding?
So in terms of voting rights, I guess, in startup, it's not so formally enforced, but it depends on who you get on the board. So I think that is one thing which is, you should actually be you should give a lot of thought on your board construct, and who are the members that you basically get on your board.
Got it. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask you some questions that people who are watching this would love to hear from you. But let's do 3 questions, 3 minutes. So super fast answers. So one question we get a lot is, what advice would you have for couples who work together, given that you are married to your co-founder?
I would say it's a bad decision. No, really. Financially, I think it's putting your eggs in one basket. And for me, when I was not getting my salary initially when we were starting the company, and then when I was living in Bay Area, at that time it felt like, oh my God, my bank balance is just going down. Though I had worked in a consulting and a VC job, which I thought were decently paying, so I have some cushion, but I could see my bank balance going down, and that is very worrying. So I would say financially it's not a good decision. In our case, what had happened, we actually convinced each other to not start it and let me do that, let the other person do it. And then we realized both of us actually have both of us really wanted to solve this independently, and then we would have done it independently if it had not done it together. So then it just made sense to do that. But yeah, I would say that do it only if there's no other option.
Diversification is key, is what I'm hearing.
Right.
The second question, what is something you'd like to be better
at? That's a very deep question. I think as a founder, you are constantly evolving in your skills, because what required to be good in the initial days changes as the company scales. So initial days you can take a problem, you can solve it. As the company grows, there are so many things which are going on, so you also have to build or think about a lot in organization, in the people, and in the people and the responsibility, and just that. So I think as the company evolves, you have to be constantly be open to realizing that you need to learn about this and do that, and then speak to people, obviously, who have done that. There are a lot of people, podcasts today, books today, that help you do that. But understand that you have to be able to do that. So I think what you require to be good has probably changed over the years, and I'm sure that that will keep changing even further.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, growth mindset is, yeah, probably. I mean, even when you are talking about things VCs look for in founders? I mean, I'd imagine that is a trait that's so important for an entrepreneur, right? Just the ability to be curious and keep learning and growing and adapting as your business demands. And question number 3. So, what did your entrepreneurial journey teach you that your corporate career did not?
Oh, I think entrepreneur journey is like you are just put in a pond, and you have to figure out everything. In a corporate, you are like in a shell. I would say that you are, there is a whole job security. Everything is going to be nice at the end. You know what is the path forward. If you're doing well. So I think there it's very defined, and that what you need to do to get to the next level, and you can see where you end up being. I think in a startup it's completely different. How much you aspire to do in a year can actually, that's not fixed. So do you want to grow your team by 10%, 20%, or double X? You can actually do both. So you have to define your own limits, and I would say it's literally it's a lot of figuring out which is there. So I don't think it can be compared. I think as a founder you have to know about 10 different things. You have to know about finance, you have to know about product, you have to know about, there's so many things.
Yeah, it seems to map onto exactly your aspiration out of IIT when you chose BCG, right? You wanted to head a business and be a CEO and wear multiple hats. Being a founder seems to map onto exactly that. I mean,
Yeah, I think being
constantly
a founder is even lesser defined. Like initially, if you don't have, an HR head, then all the HR problems also escalates to you. So you better hire the department head earlier on. Otherwise, you are doing multiple things. So I think there it's even more sort of problems, that all the problems which are not interesting, which do not have owners, also fall into your lap.
Yeah, so hire smart, hire early. That's another lesson I'm getting from
Right.
this.
Yes.
And to end with sort of the question I ask all guests. So if you could go back in time and talk to your 18-year-old self, looking at your journey till today, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
So one thing which I would definitely give myself is, when you're doing a particular thing, you are a little confused about how is it going to add up in the long term picture. Sometimes you are not sure, like if you start your career in a particular space, for instance, you're not sure about how does it add up, and then you spend a lot of energy in figuring out, oh, is it good, is it not good, and what should I be doing, etc. Right? Instead of that, I would actually say that whatever you are doing, just try to do the best in that, and the learnings will come. And as Steve Jobs had said, like, it doesn't make sense when you're seeing it, but when you reach after 10 years, when you look back, then all those things make sense. And I've actually seen that in action. I've seen two types of people. One is basically who or even myself in different stages, right? One is I've spent a lot of energy in figuring out, oh, is this right, is this not right, and over analyzing this. And the other one is like, whatever I am in, that's fine, I will keep thinking about what is the next thing I do, but I really need to be like put in 100%. So I think that has really worked, because all the learnings has then carry forward or also in the next thing. That is one tip that I was probably give to my younger self.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful, right? Like the dots connect backwards. Don't focus and obsess on connecting them forward. Just do it well. And yeah, it all makes sense in retrospect. I love that. Well, thank you, Neha. The time has flown by way faster than I thought it would, but it's been a great conversation, and I've definitely learned a lot from your journey as a venture capitalist, as a founder, and just, I mean, through this journey of building and scaling a product in India for a global market.
Awesome to be here, and loved our chat today.
Thanks.